You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Lexu Johnson, a BCBA here at ABS Kids, who is doing really meaningful work with her clients every day. Lexus is passionate about something that doesn't always get the spotlight it deserves. Making sure that kids aren't just learning skills, but learning to communicate who they are, what they need, and what they're okay with. Today, we're talking about functional communication, life skills, and what it really means to put a child's voice at the center of their care. Lexus, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how are you doing?
I am great, and I think I can't reiterate more the fact that this is a topic that needs to be spoken about more, needs probably to be at the forefront of every decision-making model, and starts at the beginning of treatment. And I mean, this could be a child who's age 2 starting, or could be all the way through adulthood, is that all these skills seem to blend together. But before we go down that road, I always love to give a little bit of background about, somebody's journey to where they are, because these passions don't start overnight. So tell us how you got into working with the autistic community and where this particular passion about giving people their voice back really came from.
Yeah. Well, I basically started back when I had just gotten out of high school and was kind of like figuring out what I wanted to do. And really just kind of thinking back to my own childhood and because I grew up in a small community in Minnesota, on just like the lack of child advocacy programs that there were, and knowing that I wanted to kind of take a big step into that. So I started out in my undergrad doing child development with a focus in neuroscience, really focusing on like how things were behind the scenes with the brain. But later on, I did a study abroad in Denmark, working with orphan refugees who really just had no voice, had no one to even like talk in their mother tongue, really. So it's like literally taking away their voice. And that really sparked that deeper passion for the who. Eventually, I went on to do my master's in child development. I did that abroad as well in Israel, again, focusing on Assent and trauma-informed care there. And when I came back, I really wanted to take a dive again into that child advocacy role, looking into law, different things. But of course, it's also when the pandemic hit, and everywhere, all of my like coworkers were talking about this huge need in ABA. And so I decided to kind of see a need, fill a need. Went back to basics, started as an RBT, worked my way up to a BCBA with the support of ABS Kids, and really just felt so empowered by a lot of my mentors to continue that journey, working towards treating the whole child and their environment, the family. And then now I'm a new mom to a 4-month-old, and just even more like driven, I guess, and seeing how valuable this is for other people's lives, children's lives, families. It's just been very meaningful.
Yeah, now I would imagine each step and kind of each path of that journey brought about a different perspective to what a voice is. And even right now with your newborn, it's a whole different view of, all right, so how's my child communicating? What does this mean? How do I make sure that they feel heard? I think it's a tough thing. And I always empathize with parents, families, when you don't understand exactly what somebody's trying to communicate with you, how do you respond? But that I think brings in the topic we'll be going over, which is functional communication training. And within the ABA field, I'll say is that, things have changed quite a bit over the years. I think that everybody initially was so kind of stuck to, I got to teach a very specific response to a very specific question, which kind of takes a voice away at some point instead of enabling. But can you give me and I guess the audience, just a general idea of what functional communication training is and maybe how that's different from some other forms of communication?
Yeah. So functional communication training, really just giving uh, basically like a remote control to the child for to access their world, right? So like traditional communication might focusing on like labeling things, colors, shapes, that kind of thing, but functional communication training is all about agency. So finding out what is their like specific communication cocktail instead of just guessing. We look for uh, what they're really trying to get across. So for example, uh, like say they're about to have a tantrum or a meltdown, and instead of waiting till they get to that point to start trying to like figure out and piece together like, oh, they wanted, some phone time, like here's some screen time. We look for those precursor behaviors. So say for instance, the child right before they have a tantrum, they start to like ball up their fist, or they have like a blank stare, or maybe they're eyeing your phone from across the room. These are all precursors that something is happening, something is thinking, processing, and that's where we need to prompt that child. It's like, oh, whatever that looks like for them. So maybe it's them using their vocal skills, like I want something. Maybe it's sign language. Maybe it's an AAC device, textbook, something along those lines. And for some of our learners, it's as simple as just like pointing, like we'll accept a point. So whatever that looks like, we make sure that the function, right, matches. And we make sure that it's getting them what they need and is being reinforced 100% of the time, at least to start.
Yeah, I mean it's very easy, and I think it's easy for all of us to fall into almost a pattern of this is how I go about doing things. And when you get to that final point where you are reinforced or you get to an end result, that's kind of where that behavior stops. And that's the most relevant part about that whole chain is what happens right before somebody meets me with that reinforcement or that in the description that you were giving is when the child really wanted to have something in particular. It's like right before that delivery, that last behavior is so important. But the way that you're describing it is communication is not a one size fits all model. It's that, especially if somebody's trying to communicate when they're already in that, whether it's upset or heightened mood, is that communication changes quite a bit at that point. So how do you help the child to really, or those around them to really identify how that child is going to communicate in these particular moments, how they're going to be able to access their voice, whether that's through sign, whether that's gesture, whether that's vocal. How do you help to build that skill so that you can intervene at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like where you would start on that, it totally depends on learner to learner if it's all individualized. If the learner comes in already with some basic vocal skills and has no interest in sign or AC or PECs, like we'll continue with building those vocal skills. Of course, it's amazing to have the collaboration of a speech language therapist throughout that journey if it's required. And oftentimes it is for some of our learners who have like a higher supports needs in that
Mhm.
area. Um, but then also, like you mentioned, when we get in those behaviors, we can kind of diminish those demands, like what's being requested of them in that moment to accept. Maybe we're accepting all language, like all types of communication. So maybe this learner does have really great vocal skills, but when they're upset, they just can't put it into words fast enough. Maybe we'll accept gestures. Maybe we're going to accept, maybe we have like a chart or a visual schedule of sorts that they can kind of just point to. Um, we can build it up through a lot of different ways. Something that I like to have my BTs do is model, like just modeling all the time. Like whatever behavior we want to see from the children, we also need to present throughout session at all times. I never want to see a technician out there taking something from my kid's hand. Like I want to see constantly modeling, like, hey, it's my turn, or hey, we're going to take a break with this. We're all done. And maybe we just like embed the signs into our, like, as we're talking through it. Same thing if a child's telling us that we're all done, like we're gonna honor that depending on what the plan is at that time. Like maybe we start to fade things out over time as to what our expectations are, but all of those initial demands at the very beginning are being reinforced 100% of the time to let them know that not only is there trust that we're building between us, but their voices matter and have weight, more weight than any maladaptive or challenging behavior could have.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you're trying to build those skills at times where, things are calmer, where you have a little bit more control over the environment around you, because it's hard for all of us to be able to put the best foot forward when things aren't calm or when there is frustration. So what is that? I mean, even if a child can communicate, is that at a time of heightened escalation, is that you're not going to always get them communicating the way you want them to, or that society would say that's appropriate to. So what is this connection between communication and challenging behaviors? So what is that relationship? I could probably think what it would look like for me is that when I'm frustrated, is that I can feel my voice might change. Even the cadence of my voice might start to deviate a little bit, or it gets louder, or but what is that? What is that kind of, how does that relationship work? Communication and challenging behaviors.
Yeah. So again, you nailed it. Like it looks different from everybody. Like one maybe like 10-year-old boy might be expressing himself very angrily. He might even like use some like childish name calling or something like that embedded into what point he's trying to get across. Like maybe we've asked him to do like a sit down work activity, and he's not about it. He wants to go play in the gym with his friends. He might communicate that in a quite angry or aggressive way. And we can kind of shape that instead. So for communication, we can, before we even get to that escalation though, like while we're calm throughout the day, if we know that that's something that might happen, we might start practicing like, hey, reminder, when you feel really angry, you might feel like saying something like this, but instead we can say it this way. We can practice it, we can role play it together, we can contrive pretend situations together with that debrief that they are pretend. And then when we get to those moments, we can have had that conversation beforehand. We can reference it and be like, hey, remember when we talked about how can we get our point across? And then you reinforce it right away so that he knows that that is the way to go about it. Similarly, for kids who don't have all of that language skills, bringing it back down, we can practice those coping skills, practicing when we were appropriately demanding for things when we were calm. We take that same thing, practice it there, and we can accept that diminished version of that response as well. So instead of maybe someone who's using a PEX exchange, the idea is that they'll flip through their book, rip off the icon, hand it to the person they're talking to. We might just throw that whole communication exchange in the trash for that exchange when they're escalated, and maybe we'll open it up to the page that we already know that they're trying to communicate and accept a gesture, something like that. Does that answer?
No, it does. And I mean, when you were discussing kind of the idea of agency, the idea of voice, the idea of control, as communication has a big piece of that. But when I think back in the past for treatment for children who are identified autistic, is that there was a big push, and this was 25 years ago, but on compliance, on doing what I tell you to do, on being able to accept it, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to agency all the time. So you had originally, when we started talking, is that we had talked about assent. And assent and functional communication go hand in hand, but I feel like it's more over the control and being able to assert my preference, my feeling, or my response onto something. So can you give me, I guess, an idea of how you would define assent and how that comes into play with what we just talked about for functional communication?
Yeah. So for assent, it's like that shift from compliance to more cooperation. And for children, this can look in a variety of ways, both vocal and non-vocal. And some of our learners come in and they are non-vocal, so it's even more important that we are really paying attention to their verbal behavior through like their whole body. So basically, assent is any expression of approval or agreement with whatever activity we have going on. So again, that can be vocal agreement, like saying yes or sure, but it can be smiling, it can be moving towards or reaching for another person, joining in an activity, requesting more. Whereas when we start to see that withdrawal, we want to make sure that we're ending whatever event is happening. So sometimes I'll see like a BT say like, hey, we're transitioning, come on, we're going. And it'll start with a handhold, right? They're holding hands together to the transition. And at one point the kid lets go. We've just lost assent, right? That child is moving out to something else, whether it be that they're more motivated by something else outwards, another classroom, a toy they see on the ground, something like that, but they're more motivated towards something else, pulling them away from the demand that we have in place. So that's when we need to pause, reassess, and adjust the environment. Whereas I think old ABA was like, we need to readjust the kid, and then that's not the frame of thought anymore.
Yeah, and I think it gives empowerment back, which is what you want.
Right.
You want somebody feeling like, hey, my skills are going to help me navigate the world around me versus my skills are simply here to appease everybody in that environment, which I think are two conflicting ideas. But
Yeah.
when you were talking about functional communication and reading body language and being able to really understand when to intervene, is that it sounds like with assent is that that's super important, so that when you see that withdrawal is that you could potentially prompt somebody to utilize those communication skills that you practice. Is that correct?
Yeah, so as soon as assent is lost, right, we want not just to see it in their verbal, we want to see them also say like, hey, no, stop, I don't want to, because that's going to move them even further and further along, especially the older they get, they're going to become an adult. We need them to, like you said, feel empowered. Basically that they're developing these self-advocacy skills, showing that their preference and needs, desires, dislikes are being respected and being heard.
And that's probably one of the hardest things conceptually, I think, for families to kind of work through is there are times where control is shared. It isn't all in one hand or the other. And it's still, I think, giving that agency back, but maybe tapping into some of their other skills of negotiating or of delaying gratification or something like that in those moments of shared control. Because assent isn't it's a concept. We should always be listening to it. But does that mean that you always give in and just do what the child's telling you to do?
Yeah, so that's like the biggest thing that gets brought up in our parent training meetings, or like, oh, you're reinforcing this 100% of the time. What does that mean for me down the road when I can't reinforce this? Like, we're in the middle of a grocery store, we're like about to leave for somewhere important, and that's part of the journey, right? And so it's not just reinforcing 100% of the time that no is king, because of course we are still wanting to maintain that assent at all times, but it's the way that we do it, and it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So it's a timeline of things that we need to teach. So maybe at first we're doing no, we're honoring when the child says no 100% of the time, and then we start introducing that delayed gratification with them tolerating us saying no to their demands for very short, maybe it's like 1 second, amazing, you did it, now we can go do your thing. And we keep introducing more time to that before we are actually starting now to do non-preferred events during that waiting period before they are reinforced. And so maybe eventually it might turn into like, yeah, thanks for letting me know you want to go do XYZ. First, we have to do this, then we get to go do that. And we can build that up with different things like a visual schedule. We can have things written out for them. But eventually that is the goal, for them to be more flexible with that. And again, it is still teaching them that my voice has power, but there are also rules that I need to follow, especially as this learner gets older. And that does that does reflect back into like transitioning into adulthood, life skills expectations. So
Yeah, and so one of the fears I think that a lot of people have with the history of learning would be is that if somebody had learned compliance or forced compliance throughout the years, is that as somebody gets older, as they start to mature and start to enter into different parts of their world, is that there are safety concerns that could arise from this. So what happens if somebody doesn't learn the skill of voice, of agency, of
Mhm.
assent?
Right. I mean, and that is one of the biggest concerns, because it's a vulnerable population. And so if we're teaching them that compliance is king and not that their own voice is king, then that puts them to be in these really, dangerous situations with people who might not have their best interests at heart, which as you grow up, that's, I feel like, a majority of people that you meet out in the real world. And so we want to make sure that they understand how to say no, how to identify unsafe situations, unsafe people, and really understand what their options are.
Yeah, and I would imagine it goes even as far as being able to enjoy their life more. Is that if you're always just following what others are doing instead of exploring interests on your own, or being able to voice or lead others to join you in activities versus always taking that passenger route, is
Yeah.
that you're missing out on a lot of the things that truly bring happiness to your life and empower you. This is something that starts young, goes all the way through adulthood. And it's a skill that needs to really be built over time. And so tell me about a time where maybe you've been able to witness this, or where you helped a child or a family to empower their child to find their voice. I know that at ABS, these are called wow moments, but
Mhm.
can you share one that sticks with you a little bit more than others?
Um, I just had a recent case. I just come back from maternity leave the like last week of February, so I've only had this case for like maybe a month. But when I got this learner, he didn't have any what we call FERBs or functional equivalent replacement behaviors. So these are the things that we're teaching to replace the behaviors that still meet the same function or same thing that he's trying to get out of the interaction. And so that to me was like a huge red flag. Let's start teaching him some things because he at the time, his biggest behavior was elopement or running away. And he was having anywhere between like 15 to 30 trials or instances of elopement in a 3-hour session, which is a lot. And we kind of took a closer look at it, noticed that it was mostly attention maintained, some sensory, of course. But the entire time he just wanted us to chase him. He has all this energy and he just wants to go play. And so he has a PECS book that was not really functional at the time. So we redid it, got him a new icon for chase, and we're teaching him that, and we were reinforcing it 100% of the time. And his elopements, which were on an increasing trend, just dropped
Mhm.
dramatically. Had all of a sudden, the first time ever, 0 elopements in an entire session, multiple days, and then like a full week of no elopement. Of course, his team is running a lot. And so now we're kind of grappling with, okay, now we need to start adding some of that delayed gratification in there. We're setting X amount of times that he can ask for running and a set amount of time. So like maybe he can ask to run like 10 laps in 5 minutes kind of thing. But then he's got to take a break, not only for him, but for his staff. And,
Everybody.
and yeah, so, but that's been really great. Of course, I only had him for this last month and then I've just transferred him out.
Mhm.
Um, but that was great to get him really rolling on that and see such amazing progress in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, and you took a behavior that could have been unsafe, especially depending on where he's running away from and what the environment is around him when he decides to make those decisions, and
Mhm.
instead making it one that A is a shared experience, but B, others are prepared for when it's going to occur, which reduces the
Mhm.
fear of safety concerns, which is amazing. But all of this, I would imagine, is so stepwise. There's like so many little skills, little techniques, little abilities that kind of sneak in, and it starts to build up. And you had said that initially it was just getting him to express this desire in a different way than just impulsively running to be able to share the need to play tag. But that next step that you're talking about, delayed gratification, is something that is going to be a whole new world of building a skill. It's going to take its own time, and it's going to take a lot of effort. This kind of goes into the process, is that in your role, you talk to families a lot. You're helping to coach them. And sometimes these pathways aren't linear. Like, you're bouncing around trying to figure it out. And it's hard as a parent to sit down and compartmentalize that, okay, this is leading to this is leading to that. Why am I doing this? What is this going to do? Now my child wants to run all the time. Like, so what is it that you would hope, as you're teaching a lot of these skills and you're helping to empower families to be a bigger and bigger part of their child's development, what do you wish that parents understood more about ABA and kind of the current practice of how you're implementing ABA and what it's working towards and the value of it?
Yeah. So that would be my first point, is just like the long game, right? So it's like what we're doing now doesn't make a ton of sense when you're looking at just the single step of like, why are they reinforcing every time he runs? That's like so unattainable. But while we're working in the now, it's reducing that elopement or that tantrum, or, teaching how to request. And then we're looking at how is that going to affect his life or their life for, the next 6 months, the next year, for the rest of his life. Right. In the short term, we want to have that, like, allow families to have that peaceful afternoon or that weekend. But long term, we want to build autonomy. We want to make sure that this child is being taught the bricks to the foundation of being like fully independent, being able to self-advocate. I would say that is like for sure the big one. I think something else that I would add on for families is transparency. I would tell your BA everything, because building these plans really only works if the BA has the full picture. So we want to know if your morning was chaotic or if we didn't get any sleep. Sometimes even when we structure the events of a behavior where we understand that what happened before the behavior and what happened after, like, tell me everything. Did brother come in at the last second and laugh at sister? Like everything that happened, not just what you think matters, because sometimes it's the little things that are really feeding a behavior or cause a behavior that you might not be thinking about necessarily.
And with a comprehensive or an intensive treatment like ABA, is that the only way to really successfully be able to titrate, reduce that intensity over time, is to empower those around us. So the more that your child develops these skills, if you as a family are able to kind of continue to build on those, introduce those to different parts of the community, then you're slowly shrinking down on all of the treatment hours, and instead doing what I think you've said 2 or 3 times, empowering. Now you're empowering the child to be a part of the world that they want to be a part of, that they want to join, that they want to contribute, that they want to explore. But it takes that team, it takes that village of everybody being on the same page. So for those families that are just thinking about this process or are just starting their ABA journey, and typically it's people are nervous, people don't know what to expect, people know that it's going to change my life quite a bit. What would you want them to know going into treatment, what they could expect or how to prepare?
Yeah. So again, back with that, like, transparency, like, you as a parent, you are the expert on your child. So we are trusting you. We need to know everything that's going on. And that while ABA is going to be very intense, it's not a forever. The idea is, like, we are going to have this like really high intensity, very comprehensive treatment plan that ideally should not be more than, depending on if you're comprehensive or on a focus plan. Whereas like focus might be only 15 hours a week, but comprehensive is 30 to 40 hours a week. Ideally, though, we don't want it to be more than a couple of years, right? at either side. So making sure that we're coming ready to be consistent. If you have questions or know that you can't like implement something that your BA is necessarily saying, tell us that. That's not a wrong answer. Saying like, that's not realistic for my lifestyle or what's going on in a home. We will rewrite the plan. We'll rewrite the script because that's kind of what our job is. We are here for you and your child. And we want to get you guys in and out so that you guys can go back to being parents and your child can go back to being a child.
Mm-hmm. And when people are entering into this journey, is that it's such a broad range that they could be entering into. Is that, I mean, you could go anywhere from 10 to 30 hours. And I mean, this is going to be a change to your daily life, to your week, to the way that you're structuring things. But the goal is that the more that you invest your time, energy, the way that you kind of change your own environment to help your child to succeed, the quicker you are going to kind of process through, and that your child will start to be able to have those skills of independence, which is really what we all look for.
Yeah. I mean, and there'll be ups and downs, right? Like there'll be like 1 month where you felt like you were really on track, and then the next month, like, gosh, we've taken 2 steps backwards with a new behavior that's popped up. And that's all a part of the process, and using your ABA team really to help build up what is, all these, like what we're saying, life skills and communication skills, like that's all part of it. Something else I feel like is worth noting is that with ABA, I think you mentioned it has like changed so much over the years. I'd also say for new families coming in to really be on the lookout for that like flexible, positive experience at wherever you're getting ABA services at. So looking for that like happy, relaxed child who's engaged in services, because if we are stressed out, we're not going to be able to learn. And so kind of bringing back to the point where therapy should be positive. And so that is like the new major shift in ABA. That's where we should continue going. And that plays back into having Assent.
Yeah. And I appreciate you giving us the time to talk about the value of communication, those links between behavior and communication. And then most importantly is the voice and agency of a child through Assent, and being able to express themselves and their needs, desires, passions, and ability to say no at times. And I think that's such an important conversation, and I hope that others continue to have it. But Lexus, I appreciate you giving us time today to be able to share your experience.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.